The night was quiet, the kind of stillness that felt like the world was holding its breath. Adam sat on his creaky porch, a steaming cup of tea in his hands, staring out at the forest behind his house. Living alone in the countryside, this was his routine. Peaceful, predictable. But tonight, something was different. A faint sound reached his ears, barely audible over the chirping of crickets. It was a soft, pained moan, carried on the wind like a whisper. Adam frowned and stood, setting his mud down. It was unusual for anyone to be out here, especially at this hour. Grabbing a flashlight, he hesitated for a moment, then stepped off the porch, curiosity driving him forward. The beam of light cut through the darkness as he walked toward the woods. The sound came again, clearer this time. It wasn't an animal. It sounded human. His pulse quickened. "Hello," he called out, his voice firm but cautious. "Is someone there?" No answer, just the rustling of leaves and the occasional distant hoot of an owl. He pressed on, his boots crunching against the undergrowth. After a few minutes, he froze. His flashlight illuminated something lying on the ground. A figure. It was a woman, curled up against the base of a tree, her breathing shallow and labored. Her clothes, or whatever she was wearing, were torn and strange, shimmering faintly under the light. Adam's heart raced as he crouched beside her. "Hey, are you okay? Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, glowing faintly, and for a moment, Adam's breath caught in his throat. They weren't human eyes. They were a brilliant shade of violet, almost too bright to be real. Her skin was pale, with a faint silvery hue, and a strange mark ran down the side of her face like a natural tattoo. "Please," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. "Don't let them find me." Adam's mind reeled. What was she? Who was chasing her? But there was no time for questions. She was hurt, badly. A deep gash ran along her side, and her trembling hand pressed against it, trying to stop the bleeding. "You're safe," Adam said, though he wasn't sure if that was true. "I'll help you." She looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with something that felt like both hope and fear. "Keep secret," she managed, before her body went limp. Adam didn't waste another second. He scooped her up in his arms, surprised at how light she was. Her skin felt cold, almost like metal. Ignoring his own confusion, he carried her back toward the house, his mind racing. Whoever, or whatever, she was, Adam knew one thing. His quiet, predictable life had just been turned upside down. Adam placed the alien woman gently on the old couch in his living room. Her breathing was shallow, and her silver-hued skin glistened faintly under the dim light. He grabbed a blanket from a nearby chair and wrapped it around her. She was freezing. His hands trembled as he fetched the first aid kit from the kitchen. He had no idea how to treat a being that wasn't even human, but he couldn't just stand there and do nothing. He crouched beside her, examining the deep gash on her side. The cut oozed a dark, shimmering liquid instead of blood, and the edges of the wound glowed faintly. "What the hell am I supposed to do with this?" he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. His hands hovered uncertainly over the wound. "Okay, basic first aid. Stop the bleeding first." Using a clean cloth, Adam pressed against the wound, hoping it wouldn't cause her more pain. To his relief, she didn't stir. She was still unconscious, her breathing uneven. He wrapped the injury as best he could, securing it with bandages. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. "Hang in there," he said softly, almost to himself. He stepped back and studied her. Up close, she looked even more alien. Her skin shimmered faintly with every rise and fall of her chest, and her violet eyes, though closed now, still burned in his memory. Her torn outfit was made of a material he had never seen before, smooth, flexible, and glowing faintly at the seams. Adam couldn't stop the question swirling in his head. Who is she? Why is she here? Who's after her? He shook his head. Those answers would have to wait. Right now, she needed to recover. The room was eerily quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Adam sat down on a chair across from the couch, his eyes fixed on the stranger. She was unlike anything he'd ever imagined, beautiful in a strange, otherworldly way, but also fragile and vulnerable. Suddenly, she stirred. Her fingers twitched, and her breathing quickened. Adam leaned forward, his heart racing. "Hey, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice soft but urgent. Her eyes fluttered open, glowing faintly in the dim light. She looked around, her gaze unfocused at first, then locking onto Adam. For a moment, she seemed afraid, her body tensing as if ready to flee. "You're safe," Adam said quickly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I found you outside. You were hurt. I brought you here to help." She stared at him for a long moment, her breathing steadying. Then, in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper, she said, "Why? Help me." Adam hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because you needed it," he said finally. "And because I couldn't just leave you out there." Her eyes softened, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile crossed her lips. "Thank you," she whispered before her eyes drifted shut again, leaving Adam alone with more questions than answers. The following morning, Adam sat at the kitchen table, his mind racing. The woman, Tala, as she had whispered her name, was still unconscious on the couch. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, her violet eyes flashed in his mind. Who was she? Why had she come to Earth? And why had she asked him to keep her secret? He glanced at the clock. It was already late morning, and Tala still hadn't stirred. Adam had thought about calling for help, but he couldn't. Something told him that if he did, it might lead to trouble. Whatever she was, whatever danger she was running from, it wasn't something ordinary. The silence in the house felt heavier as the hours passed. Adam stood up and walked into the living room, looking down at the sleeping woman. Her breath was steady now, but her skin still looked unnatural, shimmering faintly as if lit from within. He noticed something odd, a faint glow near the edge of the blanket, where her hand rested. It seemed like an electrical pulse, flickering in time with her breath. Adam blinked, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. He stepped closer, crouching down beside her. "Is this normal?" he muttered under his breath. Suddenly, Tala's eyes snapped open. The glow near her hand vanished in an instant, and her gaze locked onto Adam with a quiet intensity that made him take a step back. "Are you okay?" Adam asked, his voice almost a whisper. He had been hoping for her to wake up, but now that she had, he wasn't sure what to expect. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes scanned the room, and for a brief moment, she looked confused, like she didn't quite recognize where she was. Then her gaze shifted back to him, and she spoke in a calm voice, though it was still weak. "I'm sorry for scaring you," she said, her tone surprisingly gentle. "I didn't mean to draw attention." Adam raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by that? Draw attention? What's happening to you? What was that glow?" Tala sat up slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. She winced slightly, but she didn't seem to be in as much pain anymore. "It's not just a wound," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "It's part of what I am. Part of who I am." Adam didn't understand. "What are you talking about?" Tala paused for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I'm not like you," she began. "I'm from a planet far away, a place you wouldn't even recognize. My people, we are capable of things you would call impossible." Adam listened intently, but his mind was spinning. An alien. She wasn't human, but everything about her felt real, alive. Her skin, her eyes, her voice, it all felt genuine. The fact that she was here, injured, asking for his help, made her seem almost human in some ways, but the power she hinted at were beyond anything he could comprehend. She continued, "The glow you saw, that's a part of me. My energy. It helps heal, but it also draws attention. I've been hiding it for a long time, but in the state I was in, it couldn't stay dormant. It was reacting to the wound. You're saying you're some kind of energy being? Adam asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Tala shook her head, though the hint of a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Not exactly. We are flesh and blood, but we have abilities, powers that you would consider extraordinary, and I've used mine for a long time to stay hidden. Adam took a deep breath. He was struggling to keep up, but one thing was clear. His life was about to change forever. And Tala, whatever she was now a part of it. He couldn't turn back. Why don't you tell me everything? He said softly, watching her closely. Tala's eyes softened. She looked at him with gratitude in her gaze, and for the first time, he saw the full weight of her fear. Because if I tell you too much, you'll be in danger, and I won't be able to protect you. The days that followed were filled with a tense silence. Adam did his best to keep things normal, but every time he looked at Tala, the weight of her secret grew heavier on his shoulders. She was different. She wasn't just another person in trouble. She was something entirely otherworldly. Yet, she had trusted him with her life. But the truth was, Adam wasn't sure if he could protect her for long. The air in the house felt thicker each day. Tala spent most of her time resting, but Adam noticed something strange. Sometimes at night, her body would begin to glow faintly, like a soft, distant star shining through the darkness. He would catch glimpses of her hand or her face lighting up with a soft, unnatural glow, and each time he would quickly look away, not wanting to disturb her. One evening, while Adam was in the kitchen preparing dinner, he heard a faint noise outside. It wasn't the usual rustling of the trees or the hum of passing cars. It was something sharper, something foreign. He froze, listening closely. It wasn't until the second sound came, a low hum, that his heart skipped a beat. It was close, too close. Without thinking, Adam rushed to the window, his eyes scanning the darkened yard. His flashlight was still on the table, so he grabbed it and shined it through the glass. Nothing, just the moonlight illuminating the empty space outside. His breath slowed. Maybe it's nothing, he whispered to himself. But before he could turn away, a shadow flickered in the corner of his vision. It was quick, too quick, a movement that didn't belong. Adam's pulse quickened. His eyes darted to the back door, which he had left open for fresh air. He rushed to it, locking it instinctively as his mind raced. Tala, he muttered under his breath. He quickly moved toward the living room, where she lay on the couch, still asleep. Adam had learned not to disturb her while she rested. It seemed like it was the only time her body could regenerate from the energy she had used up. But now, a feeling of dread settled in his gut. He knew something wasn't right. He could feel it. As he reached the living room, Tala stirred, her eyes snapping open. The violet glow that had been absent for days now filled the room again, brighter than before. Her breath was shallow, as if she had sensed it too. "They're here," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. Adam felt his stomach drop. He didn't need to ask who. He already knew. "They're coming for me," Tala said, sitting up with surprising speed. Her eyes were wild, frantic now. "You have to get me out of here. They'll find us if we stay." Before Adam could speak, a sharp mechanical sound echoed from the outside. The unmistakable whir of something hovering. His heart pounded in his chest as he moved toward the window. He tried to peer outside, but the lights of a craft blazed in the distance, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward the house. Tala's hand shot out, her fingers trembling as she placed them on his arm. "They found me," she said, her voice strained. "You have to go. Take the back door. Run. Now." Adam was frozen, panic starting to claw at his throat. "I'm not leaving you," he said, his voice sharp with determination. Her eyes locked onto his, filled with desperation. "You don't understand. If they find you, they'll kill you. Please, Go. I'll distract them. Adam shook his head, stepping closer to her. No, I'm not going anywhere. Tala's face softened for just a moment, and she seemed almost grateful. But her eyes hardened again as the sound of the craft grew louder. There was no time left. Go, she repeated firmly. I will be okay. Trust me. But you have to go. Now. The words stung, but Adam knew she was right. If they were going to have any chance, he needed to get out of sight. He grabbed his jacket and rushed toward the back door, his heart heavy with fear for Tala. But he didn't look back. As he slipped through the door and into the night, a sharp, eerie hum filled the air, the sound of something far more terrifying than Adam could ever have imagined. Adam's heart pounded as he sprinted through the dense trees behind his house. His mind raced with questions and fear. What was happening? Who was coming for Tala? And most importantly, how could he help her when he barely understood what was going on? He kept running, not daring to look back. The sound of the craft had grown louder, and his ears rang with the faint hum of advanced technology, a sound that seemed completely out of place in the peaceful woods. The night was dark, the trees casting long shadows around him, and the distant flash of lights above only added to the chaos in his mind. For a moment, Adam thought about just running farther, escaping into the wilderness. But he couldn't leave Tala behind. He didn't know how, but he had made a promise to her, and somehow he had to protect her. She was injured, vulnerable, and alone in a world that wasn't hers. The least he could do was stand by her. After what felt like an eternity, Adam stopped to catch his breath behind a large rock. The sound of the craft was almost deafening now, and the lights from the hovering vehicle flashed in the distance. He was running out of time. Suddenly, the night was pierced by a soft, glowing light. Tala's voice reached his ears, though faint. Adam, you have to come back. They'll find you. He turned quickly, his eyes searching for her in the shadows. He hadn't heard her approach. Her silhouette emerged from the darkness, glowing faintly, her violet eyes shimmering as they caught the light from the hovering craft above. Tala, Adam called, running to her. What are you doing here? I told you to stay hidden. Tala didn't seem surprised to see him, but her expression was grave. You don't understand, she said, her voice shaky but determined. They've been tracking me for days. It's not just about me anymore. It's about you too. Adam frowned. What do you mean? What do they want with me? They want the data I have, Tala replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. It's information that could expose their entire operation, and they'll stop at nothing to get it back. Adam's confusion deepened. You're saying these people are aliens, and they'll come after me just for knowing you. Tala nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting both fear and resignation. Yes, the faction I escaped from is ruthless. They believe your world is just a stepping stone for their plans. If they find out you helped me, if they know you know too much, they'll kill you without hesitation. The weight of her words sank in. Adam's thoughts were racing, trying to make sense of the situation. So, what do we do now? He asked, desperation creeping into his voice. How do we stop them? Tala took a deep breath, then glanced toward the hovering craft. We can't stop them alone, she said softly. But we can delay them. I have a resistance group, others like me who've escaped. If I can send a signal, they'll come. They'll help us. Adam's mind spun as he considered her words. No resistance. You mean there are others? Others like you? Tala nodded. Yes, but we need to be quick. If we don't act fast enough, the faction will find me. And it won't matter how many people are here to help. They'll destroy everything. Adam's mind raced. He had no idea how he could help, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't stand by and do nothing. He looked at Tala, at the desperation in her eyes, and made up his mind. Then let's send the signal, Adam said with determination. I'll help you however I can. Tala looked at him, her face softening with gratitude. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "You could run, and they'd leave you alone." "I'm not leaving you," Adam replied firmly. "I don't care what it takes. I won't let them hurt you." Tala's eyes filled with something. Hope, maybe, but it was quickly replaced by the grim reality of their situation. "I'll need your help to get to the signal transmitter," she said. "But we have to move quickly. The craft is getting closer." Adam nodded, his resolve hardening. Together, they began to move through the trees, silently but with urgency, knowing that time was running out. They had no choice but to work together. In the silence of the night, the faint hum of the approaching ship reminded them both that the battle had only just begun. The night had grown colder as Adam and Tala made their way through the thick forest. The craft's hum continued to echo in the distance, but Adam didn't dare look back. The sound was too close, too dangerous. Every moment felt like it could be their last. Tala, despite her earlier exhaustion, moved swiftly and silently through the trees. Her glowing skin flickered in the darkness, but she seemed to have control over it now, dimming it to match the shadows. Adam kept a few steps behind her, trying his best to keep up. His mind was filled with questions, but he knew better than to ask her too many right now. They had more important things to focus on. As they reached the edge of the forest, Tala turned to him. "We're close," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "The signal transmitter is just ahead." Adam nodded, his heart pounding. He had no idea what this device would do or how it would help, but he trusted her. They didn't have many options left. Tala led him to a small, hidden structure just beyond the tree line. It was nothing more than a metal box, barely larger than a suitcase, covered in moss and vines to keep it camouflage. Adam raised an eyebrow. This was the signal transmitter. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. "This is it," Tala said, kneeling beside the box. Her fingers danced over the surface, pressing hidden buttons with precise movements. The box hummed to life, and a small screen appeared on its surface, flickering with static. Adam crouched beside her, trying to understand what was happening. "What is this thing? What does it do?" Tala didn't look up, her attention fully focused on the device. "It's a communication relay," she explained, her voice calm despite the urgency in her actions. "It will send out a distress signal to the resistance. If they're close enough, they'll receive it and come to our location." Adam's mind raced. "And if they don't come?" Tala paused for a moment, her fingers hovering over the buttons. She finally looked up at him, her expression serious. "If they don't come, we fight alone." Her words hung in the air, heavy and full of meaning. Adam didn't know how much longer they could hold out. The enemy was getting closer, and every minute felt like a countdown to disaster. Before he could say anything more, the screen flickered, and a new image appeared. An alien symbol, one that was unfamiliar to Adam, but instantly recognizable to Tala. Her eyes widened with hope, and she quickly activated a series of commands. "They're receiving it," she said, her voice filled with relief. "The resistance, they're responding." Adam felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was short-lived. The craft's hum had grown even louder, and the ground beneath them seemed to vibrate with the force of its engines. Tala's hand trembled as she continued to operate the device. "They'll be here soon, but we don't have much time. They're already scanning for us." Adam looked at the screen again, trying to make sense of what was happening. He saw images, quick, fleeting flashes, of alien ships and distant planets. Then, the screen displayed something he hadn't expected. A map. A map of the area, with a red dot marking their location. "They found us," Tala whispered, her face drained of color. "They know where we are." Adam's stomach dropped. "What do we do now?" Tala closed her eyes for a moment, her body going still as if she was gathering every ounce of energy she had left. When she opened her eyes again, there was a steely determination in them. "Now we fight," she said, her voice steady, but filled with an edge that sent a chill down Adam's spine. Before Adam could ask what she meant, Tala reached for a small, sleek device hidden in her belt. She pressed a button, and the air around them seemed to crackle with energy. The trees trembled, and a low hum filled the air as a shield of glowing light appeared around them, protecting them from view. "The resistance is coming, but we have to hold them off until they get here," Tala said, her eyes scanning the sky. "Are you ready?" Adam didn't hesitate. He had no idea what was coming, but he wasn't about to leave her side now. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady despite the fear creeping into his chest. Together, they stood, side by side, ready to face whatever was coming next. The stillness of the night was shattered by the unmistakable sound of a powerful engine roaring overhead. Adam's heart leaped into his throat as he looked up at the dark sky, the glow of the hovering craft casting long shadows over the forest floor. The enemy was here. They had arrived. Tala stood beside him, her eyes locked on the craft, her expression unreadable. Her energy shield shimmered softly around them, a faint but steady hum that seemed to vibrate through the air. For a moment, everything felt suspended, as though time itself had paused, waiting for the first move. "They're here," Tala whispered, her voice steady but tense. "Stay close." Adam's grip tightened around the makeshift weapon he'd found, an old branch from one of the nearby trees. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. He had no training, no experience in combat, but he knew that he couldn't just stand by and watch as Tala fought alone. The craft lowered slowly, its large silhouette blocking out the stars as it hovered a few hundred feet above the ground. Adam's breath caught in his chest. He could see figures moving inside the craft's dimly lit windows, and he knew they were coming for them. Tala's energy shield flickered, responding to the increased presence of the enemy. It wasn't enough to hide them. It was only enough to protect them from a direct attack. She turned to Adam, her voice urgent. "We have to move. If we stay here, they'll find us." Before Adam could respond, a sharp mechanical sound pierced the air. From behind the craft, several smaller drones shot out, their sleek, metallic bodies gliding silently through the night. They were fast, too fast for Adam to outrun. Tala acted instantly. She raised her hand, and with a swift motion, a pulse of energy shot out from her fingertips, hitting the closest drone and sending it crashing to the ground in a shower of sparks. Adam watched in awe, his heart pounding in his chest. The energy blast had been both precise and powerful, but there were more drones coming. "They're scanning for us," Tala said, her voice tight with focus. "We need to keep moving." Without waiting for Adam to respond, Tala darted forward, her glowing form weaving through the trees, and Adam followed. His feet stumbled as he tried to match her pace, but fear gave him the strength to push through the darkness, the sound of the drone's engines growing louder with each passing second. A blast of bright blue light shot past them, narrowly missing Tala's shoulder. The drones had locked onto their location. Adam's breath hitched as he turned his head, his eyes catching a glimpse of a second energy blast, this one aimed directly at him. Tala's hand shot up, and the shield around them expanded, the energy barrier crackling to life just in time to absorb the blast. Adam stumbled, nearly losing his balance, but he stayed on his feet. "Get down," Tala shouted, her voice urgent. She pushed Adam to the ground, her body shielding him as more drones closed in. Adam's mind raced, his thoughts scattered. The world was moving too fast. He didn't know how to fight. He didn't know how to survive this. But he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't lose her. Not now. Not after everything they'd been through together. The drones were getting closer. Tala's shield flickered, and Adam could see the strain on her face. She was using all of her energy to keep them safe, but it wouldn't last long. "They're not going to stop," she said through gritted teeth. "We need a plan. We need to take them down. Now." Adam nodded, adrenaline coursing through his veins. His eyes darted around, searching for anything that could help. His gaze landed on a large rock formation just ahead. It was high enough to give them some cover and, if they were lucky, a vantage point to take out the drones. Without a word, Adam sprinted toward the rocks, his heart pounding in his chest. Tala was right behind him, her shield flickering and sparking as it absorbed another blast from the drones. When they reached the rock, Adam quickly ducked behind it, pulling Tala with him. "We can't just hide forever," Adam panted, breathless. "We need to fight back." Tala nodded, her eyes burning with determination. "I know. I need time." Adam didn't know how much time they had. The drones were closing in. He could hear their mechanical hums getting louder, their searchlights sweeping across the ground. His hand gripped the branch tightly, and he turned to Tala, ready to do whatever it took. "We'll fight," Adam said, his voice steady now, a new sense of resolve taking root in him. "Together." Tala gave him a small, grateful smile before she turned back to face the advancing drones. Her energy shield flared one last time as she prepared for the fight ahead. They didn't have much time, but if they worked together, they might just make it out alive. The tension in the air was thick with the sound of approaching drones. Adam's heart raced as he peered around the rock formation, his eyes darting from one drone to another. They were circling, getting closer with every passing second. Tala's shield was flickering, and Adam could see the strain in her face. She was holding on by a thread, her energy almost spent. "We can't keep this up much longer," Adam said, his voice urgent. "There's too many of them." Tala didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the drones as they swarmed, their searchlights sweeping over the ground, scanning for them. The light from the drones seemed to cut through the night, making the darkness feel even heavier. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "We don't have a choice," she replied, her voice low and strained. "I need you to trust me. I have a plan, but we have to act fast." Adam didn't hesitate. "Tell me what to do. I'm ready." Tala's violet eyes met his, her expression serious. "We need to get to the power core in the middle of the craft. It's the only way we can shut them down." "The power core?" Adam asked, confused. "How are we supposed to get there? We can barely stay hidden, let alone get close enough to the craft." Tala's face was set in determination. "I know it sounds impossible, but it's our best shot. I can get us inside, but I'll need you to create a diversion." Adam blinked. "A diversion? How?" Tala nodded toward the glowing, hovering craft. "The drones are focused on us, but they're also scanning for anything out of place. If we can create a distraction, it will draw their attention away long enough for me to get close to the core." Adam swallowed hard. He didn't like the idea of drawing more attention to themselves, but he understood. If they didn't do something drastic, they would be trapped. "I'll do it. What's the plan?" Tala's voice softened slightly. "You're going to need to use your strength. I can't hold the shield for much longer, so you'll have to take the lead. Throw anything you can find. Rocks, branches, anything to distract the drones and the craft. While they're focused on you, I'll slip behind the craft and disable the power core." Adam nodded, though his stomach twisted with nerves. "And what if they catch you? What if they see you?" "I'll be quick," she said with a small smile. "I'm not an easy target." Adam's gaze locked onto her, and in that moment, he realized something important. This was more than just a fight for survival. They were risking everything for a chance to win. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this. He wasn't going to let Tala face this alone. Not now. "All right," Adam said, his voice steady now. "Let's do it." He stood up slowly, carefully peering around the edge of the rock. The drones were still circling, their focus on the area where they had last been seen. Adam took a deep breath and, without waiting for another moment, picked up a large rock. He tossed it as far as he could, sending it crashing through the trees with a loud noise. The drones immediately shifted their focus, their searchlights snapping to the sound of the impact. Adam's heart raced as he threw another rock, and then another, Each throw seemed to make the drones move faster, their attention fully drawn to the noise. Tala looked at him one last time, her eyes filled with gratitude and determination. "Now, go," she said, before darting out from behind the rock and sprinting toward the craft. Adam kept throwing rocks, making as much noise as possible, but he didn't look away from her. Tala moved swiftly, blending into the shadows as she closed the distance between herself and the craft. He could see her faint glow in the distance, but it was quickly swallowed by the dark. She was out of sight now, leaving him with nothing but the sound of the drones closing in on him. He didn't know if she could pull this off, but he couldn't afford to think about that. He kept throwing rocks, hoping the distraction would buy Tala the time she needed. His muscles ached, and his breath came in ragged bursts, but he pushed through. He had no other choice. Then, without warning, a loud, high-pitched screech cut through the air. The drones began to hover in place, their searchlights flickering out. Adam's heart skipped a beat. He turned quickly, searching the skies, and saw the craft suddenly lose power, its lights dimming. A burst of light erupted from the center of the ship, followed by a loud explosion. The drones that had been hovering nearby dropped to the ground in a heap. Tala had done it. The sudden silence that followed the explosion was deafening. Adam stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. The drones that had been circling them moments before were now nothing more than twisted metal on the ground. He couldn't believe it. They had done it. Tala had actually done it. But there was no time to celebrate. The craft above them, though dimmed and disabled, was still hovering. Its engines hummed low, and Adam could feel the power within it, like a beast waiting to strike again. He knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Tala's voice broke through the silence, filled with urgency. "We have to move. Now." Adam turned to see her, standing just a few feet away, looking tired but determined. Her glowing form was flickering, and he could see the strain on her face. The energy shield she had used earlier had drained her strength, but she was still standing. Without thinking, Adam grabbed her arm and pulled her into motion. "Let's go," he said, his voice tight. "They'll come for us soon." They didn't need to be told twice. The two of them sprinted through the trees, trying to put as much distance between themselves and the disabled craft as possible. The woods seemed endless, and every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, felt like a threat. Behind them, the craft began to glow again, its engines roaring back to life. Adam risked a glance over his shoulder and saw the craft's lights flicker back on, brighter than before. It was preparing to launch again. Whatever had gone wrong with it, whatever Tala had done to disable it, was only temporary. Tala's voice rang out. "There's a clearing ahead. We need to get there. It's the only place where we might be able to fight back." Adam nodded, urging his legs to move faster. The clearing wasn't far, but every step felt like it took them farther from safety and closer to the looming threat above. The sound of the craft's engines was growing louder now, its humming noise vibrating through the ground, making the hair on the back of Adam's neck stand up. Tala was starting to lag behind, her pace slowing as the energy she had used earlier took its toll. She stumbled slightly, and Adam caught her arm. "Hey, don't stop. You have to keep moving." "I can't keep this up much longer," Tala said through clenched teeth, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "I need time to recharge." Adam's stomach twisted in fear. They didn't have time. The craft was already adjusting its position, moving toward them. He could hear the distinct whir of the drones lifting off once more, their searchlights scouring the woods for their targets. "Tala, I need you to hang in there," Adam said, his voice firm. "We're almost there." But even as he spoke, a new sound filled the air, a deep, resonating hum, much louder than the craft's engines. Adam's eyes widened in disbelief as he looked up. The craft wasn't just hovering anymore. It was moving toward them, slowly descending into the clearing. "Move," Tala gasped, her voice filled with panic. Adam grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the clearing, his legs burning with the effort. The trees began to thin, and the moonlight broke through the canopy. The clearing was just ahead. They were almost there. As they reached the edge of the clearing, Tala pulled away from him. "I have to do this alone," she said, her voice filled with determination. Adam stopped, his heart hammering. "What are you talking about?" Tala turned to face him, her eyes fierce. "If we're going to survive, I need to shut that craft down once and for all. I can do it, but I'll need you to hold them off. You have to buy me time." Adam shook his head. "I can't fight them alone. I don't know how." "You have to try," she interrupted. "You're stronger than you think. Just hold your ground, and I'll do the rest." Before Adam could protest further, Tala sprinted toward the center of the clearing, her body glowing with a faint otherworldly light. The craft's engines roared as it dropped lower, its massive form looming overhead. The drones were closing in on them, their mechanical eyes scanning the ground for their targets. Adam's heart raced. His hands were trembling, and his thoughts were scattered. But there was no time to second-guess. He picked up a fallen branch, clutching it like a weapon. As the drones neared, he swung it at the first one that came into range, striking it with a force he hadn't known he was capable of. The drone jerked back, its systems malfunctioning as sparks flew from its metal frame. Adam's pulse surged. He could do this. He had to. He swung again, knocking another drone out of the sky. His heart pounded in his ears as the clearing erupted into chaos. The drones were descending quickly, their mechanical limbs reaching out to capture him. But Adam wasn't backing down. Not now. The clearing was filled with noise now, the sound of drones crashing to the ground, the roar of the craft's engines, and the crackling energy as Tala unleashed her power. Adam's heart raced as he fought with everything he had, swinging his makeshift weapon at the drones that came at him one after another. Every hit, every swing, felt like it could be his last. But he wasn't backing down, not with Tala depending on him. He glanced over his shoulder for a split second. Tala was standing in the center of the clearing, her body glowing with a soft, shimmering light. She was focused, her hands raised high as if channeling every bit of her energy into the craft. The air around her crackled with power, and Adam could feel the electricity in the air, almost as if the world itself was holding its breath. The drones were getting closer, but Adam refused to let them take their focus off Tala. He swung again, knocking a drone out of the sky, but there were still more coming. It felt like they were everywhere. He was running out of time, and so was she. "Come on, Tala," Adam muttered under his breath, his voice filled with both hope and desperation. Just a little longer. Behind him, Tala's energy shield flickered and pulsed. The crackling sound grew louder, and for a brief moment, everything went still. Adam's heart skipped a beat. Was she done? But then, with a sudden burst of light, Tala's energy surged. A beam of brilliant blue light shot up from her outstretched hands, blasting into the sky. The craft above them shuddered, its engines stuttering as the beam of energy hit it directly. Adam watched in awe as the craft's lights flickered, the sound of its engines slowly dying down. The drones, which had been swarming around them, halted in midair, their mechanical limbs freezing as if caught in a spell. The air was filled with an eerie silence. Tala collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily, her body flickering in and out of her glowing form. She had given everything she had, and now she was spent. Adam ran to her, his heart pounding in his chest as he knelt beside her. "Tala," he called, panic creeping into his voice. "Are you okay? Talk to me." Her eyes fluttered open, her violet gaze locking onto his. A faint smile appeared on her lips. "We did it," she whispered, her voice weak but full of relief. "It's over." Adam let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. She was alive. They had done it. They had won. But as he looked down at her, he could see the toll it had taken. Her energy shield had vanished, and her once glowing skin now appeared pale and drained. She was barely holding on. "You need to rest," Adam said urgently, reaching out to support her. "We can't stay here. We have to." Tala shook her head weakly, her hand reaching up to touch his arm. "There's no time," she said softly. "I've done what I came to do. The resistance will take it from here. They'll get you to safety." Adam's eyes filled with confusion and sorrow. "What are you talking about? You can't just leave." She smiled again, a faint, bittersweet smile. "I'm not leaving. I'll always be with you, in a way. But I can't stay here. My people, I belong to them. And they're coming. They'll take me home." Adam felt a lump form in his throat. He couldn't imagine life without her, not after everything they had been through. "I don't want you to go," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You mean too much to me." Tala's gaze softened, and her hand reached up to gently touch his cheek. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. "You helped me in a way no one else ever could. You've made me feel human. You've shown me that there is hope, even in the darkest of times." Tears welled in Adam's eyes as he looked at her, but he nodded, understanding. He knew this wasn't just a goodbye. It was a promise. He had helped her, and now she was going to make sure the world she had come from was safe. Above them, the sound of a ship approaching grew louder, and soon a light descended from the sky. Adam's heart sank as he saw the silhouettes of others like Tala, her people. They were here to take her back. "You'll be okay," Tala whispered one last time, her voice steady and full of reassurance. "You'll be fine, Adam. Just keep being who you are." The light from the ship enveloped her, and Adam felt her warmth fade, replaced by the chill of the night. But in that moment, as the light took her away, he knew that their paths had crossed for a reason. She had changed him. And maybe, just maybe, one day, their worlds would collide again. As the ship disappeared into the sky, Adam stood alone in the clearing, his heart heavy, but his spirit lifted. The adventure had ended, but the memory of the alien woman who had trusted him would stay with him forever.